In your workbook, you will find the placement guide for this applique. Now this is just a half of it because of the size. So what you're going to do is you're going to lay it down with your fabric on top, put a couple pins in just to hold it in place, and then we're going to trace the design. This marking goes very quickly because you're only placing or tracing general ideas of where the items go. For example, the flowers you're drawing, just the center circle, because you don't want these marks to show once you put the applique down. On the flower buds, just do the calyx part, not the bud part, because that's going to be a 3D applique. The leaf, just draw a line down through the center. That shows the direction of the leaf. Once you're done with that, remove the pins, turn the design around, line it back up on the marks, put your pins back in, and continue to trace. Make sure it is lined up in the center point though. And just that quickly, we have all the placement marks done. That wasn't too bad. We want to make our own bias tape to go around the circle of this applique wreath. And let me show you how we're going to do it. We'll start out by cutting a 1-inch wide bias strip from your fabric. When you cut the bias strip, you automatically get a diagonal end, which makes it very easy to slip into your bias tape maker. Now, if you don't have one, I'll show you an option. Take a pin and just slide it through until you get the tip of the fabric coming out the end. After that, you can pull and then use your fingers to pull it the rest of the way. Now we're going to grab the iron and start pressing our bias tape as it comes out of the bias tape maker. I have found starching the fabric first makes this process go a lot easier. Now just take your iron with steam and just gently push your bias tape maker along the fabric, making sure your bias tape stays straight. You can see as you're doing that, it's automatically turning over both edges of your bias tape. Now if you're not pleased with an edge, back it up and press it again. Continue in this method until you get the entire strip completed. And just that easily, you have your entire 20-inch piece of bias tape pressed and ready to go. Although a bias tape maker is a great thing to have, if you don't have one, grab a long needle. Then mark on a piece of paper 2 lines a half an inch apart. Now we'll start to make some bias tape with that needle and the paper. The reason for the paper is to allow our bias fabric to slide very smoothly during this process. Your next step is to insert the needle into the paper and then come back out at the first mark. Then go back down the second mark and come back out the other end. This forms a bridge for our bias tape to go through. Just like you did for the bias tape maker, you're going to slide your bias cut fabric underneath that bridge in the needle and make sure the ends are folded over on each side, and then you'll press. And then you'll pull out a little bit more, making sure it's under the needle correctly, and then you'll press some more. And you'll continue on in this method, pulling out your tape pressing some more until you've completed your bias strip. I'm using Soline fabric glue, but you can use any glue stick for this purpose. And what you're going to do is to just spread a little bit of glue on the marks that you placed on your fabric block, right where the circle is. Then you're going to take your bias tape and start placing that on the glued lines. The glue will hold it in place temporarily. I then take glass-headed pins and place them along the bias tape. Now you can use the metal flower pins also if you have them, but you do not want to use a pin with a plastic head because they'll melt with our next step. So continue along, keep using that glue stick, let your bias tape go around that edge, and you can see because it is bias, it follows that circle very nicely. Our next step will fix some of the ripples that you might see in the bias tape. Now this is why I like the glass head or flower headed pins, because I can press right over top of those pins, ensuring that the glue really adheres to my fabric piece without fear of my pin heads melting on me. Now I'm going to continue along. When I get to this end, now I have to do a little bit of trimming. Now you don't have to worry that it's absolutely perfect, because if you recall, there's going to be a flower right where these two pieces meet. That's why we started where we did. So we're just going to overlap these pieces, see where we need to trim, and cut it off. One more little dab of glue where the ends meet, a final press, and we're ready to start stitching. I have my machine set up for a zigzag stitch. The stitch width is 1.5. Yep, that's pretty narrow. And the stitch length is 1.0. Now you might be nervous about that narrow stitch width. However, if you keep the center of your foot right on the edge of your bias tape, it will cover sufficiently and not leave such a big heavy thread buildup and presence on your block. And once you try this very narrow zigzag stitch for applique, you'll see that it's actually easier to do this on curves than it is a wider zigzag. Trace your leaf and calyx shapes on your freezer paper. Take that piece and stack it on top of 3 other pieces of freezer paper and press them all together. This will give you a much stiffer template to use. After you've done that, trim all the pieces off the freezer paper. Now remember, this will be 4 layers thick. After the trimming has been completed, we are now ready to place it on the fabric. You want to make sure that you're putting your pieces down to allow ample room all around for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. once you're sure you have that seam allowance allowed for, go ahead and press your pieces to your fabric and then trim around, allowing 1/4 of an inch approximately for each piece. To start this process, get yourself a little container, take your heavy-duty spray starch, and spray it into your container. Now you'll see it's really foamy, but that's okay. It'll liquefy in a very short period of time. And that's what we're going to use for our applique work. Now I want to take each piece and clip carefully on just the curved edges. Clip about 2 to 3 threads away from the actual template. Now we're ready for the magic. Grab a paintbrush or a Q-tip, and then we're going to paint the spray starch on the edges of the applique piece. Now you can use a little iron, a little clover, mini iron, but you can use your large iron as well. In fact, the large iron works well because of the extra weight involved. Using your iron, what you're going to do is make motions towards the template with the iron. Just let it go ahead and push the fabric over the edge, just like that. You won't use a steam iron because that would do some serious damage to your fingertips. Just a dry iron is all it takes. And you'll get such a nice smooth edge because of that heavy template. Now we'll repeat that same process on the other side. And one of the reasons that we clipped our fabric up close to the template is so that when we do press the fabric against the template, it won't form creases on those edges. Instead, it makes an allowance so that the fabric can lay flat. So just press the iron against the template, making the fabric lay down for you. It's almost doing it all by itself. All you have to do is push the iron against it. The last thing you need to do is to worry about these points, and that's pretty simple. We're just going to take some scissors and clip it off, not quite to the point because we don't want to have a raw edge on the point, but close. And now we're going to flip that over just a little bit and give it another press. And we'll catch that point very well when we're doing our stitching. We're going to repeat that process on the other side, clipping the excess fabric, and then we'll turn and press that as well. The calyx appliques are done exactly like the leaves, in that we're going to take the spray starch and apply it with a brush or a Q-tip to the edges. We're ready to turn it, but we forgot to clip the curves. Never too late. Go in there and clip just on the curved edges. You don't have to clip any of the straight edges. While we're at it, we'll go ahead and do the other side. Now fold that seam allowance over the template, take your iron and just press it against the template. We now have a nice smooth edge on that side, so we'll go ahead and repeat the same process on the other side. You want to make sure that you're really saturating the fabric. Don't be skimpy with the starch. So you're going to fold it over, get the iron, press it against the template, just work it around, and just like that you have the second side done. Now we're going to treat the top part of the calyx exactly the same as the sides. We'll just wet it with the spray starch, fold it down, and press. And there's our applique. We're going to trim off that little point there at the end. Now you might be asking yourself about the freezer paper that's still in the templates. Well, look how easy this comes out. Just peel an edge back just very carefully, just until we can get a hold of it and out it pops. And we still have a nice crisp edge to our appliques. Want to see that again? Let's try calyx. Just peel back the side just a little bit, get a hold of the freezer paper, and just tug it out. And after it comes out, you can see you have not lost your edge turn at all. So you're going to go ahead and continue taking the rest of the paper out. By the way, if you were doing more, you would be able to reuse those templates. Now let's go ahead and put it on our square. So we're going to line it up to our marks and just pin it in place all around. So we've got our leaf showing the direction the leaf is supposed to go by the line that we drew, and just pin them all around. So our leaves are ready to be stitched down. Now let's work on the calyx. We're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to lay them down so that they're close to the bias ring, and we're going to pin it in place. And we're going to do the other ones the same way. After all the leaves and all the calyx have been put in place and pinned down, we'll be ready to take this project over to the sewing machine. Now we're ready to start stitching. Again, the stitch width is set at 1.5, stitch length at 1.0. I'm starting part way down the side. I never ever start on the tip. So we're going to work our way around the side and continue on until we get close to the tip, as shown in the drawing on the right. We want to stop with our needle down on the outside of the leaf. Then we're going to turn the applique so that we can take one stitch into the point. Now turn it again and work your way back up the other side. That ensures that that little piece that we had to snip off so that it wouldn't show when we were doing the turning of the applique is tightly secured and there are no raw edges on your applique. You'll continue doing the same thing with the other side, and if you can't get your needle to stop right at the point, stop, lift your presser bar, and just reposition it ever so slightly in order to get that to work. Now again, you'll pivot, take one stitch into the leaf, pivot again, and work your way down the other side, and then tie off. You'll do the rest of the leaves exactly the same way. Now the calyx we're going to stitch almost exactly like we did with the leaves, except for one exception. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start this time at the very top edge of the one side. And I'll explain this later. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to lock the stitches this time before we start stitching down the side. Just like we did on the leaves, we're going to do that pivot stitch into the point and then turn around and come back up the other side of the calyx. Now when we get to the very top of this edge, we're going to tie off again. We are not going to stitch across the top edge. This will be explained later. Continue stitching all the rest of the calyx in the same manner until all the leaves and calyx are attached. We just have so many things to cover on this first block. It won't all fit in one session. So join us for part 2 and we'll take it up from there.